Path of Building is an excellent tool, but like all good tools, it has to be used correctly. And all too often, I see either deceptive practices on the part of certain build makers, who want their build to look much better than it actually is, or people who just don't know the implications of every little setting, and therefore end up making their build worse by trying to get better numbers when those numbers don't really matter. Now, if you don't like watching videos and learning things, I'm not sure how you made it to my channel, but you can safely click off of this video with the knowledge that numbers in PoB often don't actually mean anything. This number right here that says I have 5.7 mil DPS is true some of the time. It's also untrue much of the time. I'm going to have less or more than 5.7 million DPS. There's a lot of factors that simply aren't caught in PoB's ability, because that ability is limited by people programming it in. There's also things that apply situationally or temporarily, and you can't really model for that most of the time. So today, I wanted to break down some of these examples and hopefully give you a better idea of the ways in which you shouldn't use PoB, so that you can get back to using PoB in ways that will help you and build your knowledge of various things in Path of Exile. This look at Path of Building is brought to you in part due to the generous support of my patrons and YouTube channel members. More about how you can help at the end of a video. So to start with, I want to look at the configuration tab. This is where a lot of people mess up, because you calculate a lot of your buffs here. So do you have power charges, frenzy charges, and endurance charges? In my current build, yes, it's pretty safe to assume that I do have frenzy charges, and I do have power charges. I have frenzy charge on hit, and power charges from spending mana and on crit. Do I have tailwind? Yes. I didn't have it checked, but I definitely have tailwind as long as I've crit recently, which means as long as I've cast recently. Do I have fortify? No. Am I on consecrated ground? I had this one checked because I was messing with stuff. Realistically, sometimes, but not always. This is one where it's going to be up a lot of the time, as I have a bottled faith, and I have a Arcanist brand that's casting out Purifying Flame to give myself more consecrated ground, and Zealotry can create consecrated ground when I hit things, but not always. Have I crit recently? Well, if I've cast recently, yes, so this is a fairly safe one. Then we go over here. Don't mind the enemy bleeding thing, that's just a holdover. Are they ignited? Well, no, they're not actually ignited, and they're not actually chilled, so we can take those off for full accuracy. In this case, they don't really matter. Do we have 15 wither stacks? Again, this is a depends. On an enemy that clears their stacks fairly often like Cirrus, probably not. The answer is probably more like 8. And as you can see, my DPS goes down as a result. On most other things, 15's a fairly safe bet. With Withering Presence, the stacks will never actually fall off once I've applied them. Now, similarly, are they shocked? Well, I had this as yes, because my shield has chance to shock attackers for 4 seconds on block. But the real answer is maybe. Sometimes I won't be shocking them. It's only a 30% chance, and I only block 70 or 74% of the time. On the other hand, on a fight like Cirrus that's legitimately dangerous to my character, I might not be shocking him at all, because I might be avoiding all of his abilities, and if I'm never blocking anything, I'm never shocking anything. This is one that I had on just because I was messing around, and therefore it could be true. It could also be false. Is Vianney on consecrated ground? I covered that earlier. It's pretty safe to say yes. So these are just a few examples of things that could be true. Another one that I don't have checked up is Frost Shield. Sometimes Frost Shield will be at 4 stages. Sometimes it will be at 0 stages. And sometimes I won't even be standing in it. The calcs page is great. It definitely gets you the most accurate DPS possible, but it's not perfect. It often doesn't account for uptime. And not accounting for uptime is a big reason behind why people say, oh, I have 5 mil DPS, why does it feel so bad? Well, it feels so bad because you have 5 mil DPS, but your uptime on that damage might be 10 or 20% of the time, and the rest of the time you only have 1 or 2 mil DPS. You expect the number to be much bigger than it is, so the DPS feels bad. If you're on the same character and you saw 1 mil DPS, it would feel really good, at least relative to the number you're expecting, because there are times where your DPS spikes up above that expected number. Now that I've gone over the calc page, I want to go over a couple other things, such as flasks. Generally, it's fairly safe to assume that while you're clearing trash, these are always going to be up. Especially in high-density maps, you're going to be killing and everything's going to be recharging your flasks. If you have use when full, or if you're hitting them, they're going to be up fairly often. But on a boss, it's actually a lot safer to turn these flasks off, and look at the consequences. The consequences of having these flasks off says that my DPS is significantly lower. And again, it's about setting expectations. A similar thing can be done with guard skills. Right now, Immortal calls active, and if you look in calcs, this shows up significantly bolstering my EHP. I could take a hit of 12,000, and the effective hit pool is 18,000, which for this build isn't particularly accurate because of recovery on block and several other factors, like Frost Shield. But let's just pretend this was all perfectly accurate. Well, if my maximum hit taken is 12.5k, it's pretty good. But all of a sudden it goes down to 8. Most of my fizz mitigation is coming from a guard skill being active, when that guard skill isn't active all the time. And so this is another example where it depends, and maybe I have that good mitigation. Maybe I don't. Maybe I get hit during a downtime, and I just fall over. These little downtimes are a large part of why players often feel like they get one-shot. Everything lines up where the enemies hitting you may be critting you, but your defenses are currently down, so you explode. Another thing that PoB doesn't necessarily accurately model is damage calculations when you're not following the rules. Forbidden Right does not have a hard cap on the number of projectiles that can overlap. It does have a really strong soft cap of 5, though. You're going to have to try super hard to get more than 5 overlaps. So 1 base projectile plus greater volley is 5, and that's all cool. But if I put a Dying Sun into my build and turn it on, PoB doesn't know that those 2 new projectiles aren't going to overlap on the boss. They assume that the boss's hitbox is infinite, and that the skill just overlaps automatically. This is where you have to be a smart user. You have to know that the skill only overlaps 5 times, and not continue to stack projectiles. If you don't know that, you're going to end up with a lot of DPS here, no actual DPS in game. And it's not very easy to demonstrate with this build, so I'm going to check blinded even though I don't have a good source of it right now. But if you look at the calcs page, this is also not entirely accurate. If we're talking about a skeleton that's trying to hit us, well, that's a melee attack. And against melee attacks, the Fizz EHP of this build is pretty good, at 36,000 with a max hit of 12.4k. What happens if we set it to spell? More like what you'd get from Cirrus's Die Beam. The max hit stays the same, at least while our guard skill's up. But the effective HP pool, or effective hit pool, is much lower. This is because we lost avoidance. If you look at the chance to not be hit, there's a nice 50% here for attacks. That doesn't apply to spells. So if you only ever look at the average, you end up in a little bit of a difficult situation, where you're making decisions that increase your EHP, that look to make you tankier. This goes from 24,000 down to 18,000 when I uncheck blind. But my EHP against Cirrus doesn't change because he doesn't use attacks. Now, am I trying to say that Path of Building's bad and you shouldn't use it? No, not at all. Path of Building is a great tool. What I am saying is, don't trust every number just by itself. Do your best to understand what that number means in the greater context of the game, with your knowledge of a skill's behavior, and with your knowledge of what you're going to be fighting. If you do this, PoB is a great tool. If you don't, you're going to run into some trouble. And all too often, I see people who don't follow this as closely because they're lacking knowledge, which is why I make so many videos trying to educate on the basics of skills, mechanical interactions, and the ways to build defensive layers. Blind is a great defensive layer, but it's only really good while mapping. Similarly, having a guard skill is good, but it only does something while it's up. If you want passive defenses, you have to get something else. So let's say I wanted a passive defense that increases my Phys EHP. Well, maybe I change my chest. Maybe instead of the additional curse, I put something else on it. Now I know this is a corrupted item, you can't actually change it, but let's just pretend here. So now I've gone ahead and I've switched this to be 15% of physical damage from hits is taken as chaos damage. On this build, I also have chaos inoculation, meaning I'm immune to chaos damage. So 15% of physical damage from hits is no longer taken. Now, for the effective hit pool, as I mentioned, it doesn't noticeably increase it because the effective hit pool calculation just isn't very accurate for modeling a build like this that combines things like ES on hit, recovery on block, and other non-stable sources like Enduring Cry. I'm going to be much tankier between my Enduring Cry, my Frost Shield, and my recovery on block than this is ever going to display. The max hit has gone up significantly. That's because there's now a portion of my Phys damage that I'm just not taking, because I don't take chaos damage. This is just one example of the way that you can use POB to model things and get an idea of where it's going to make the most impact. Always look at the direct change between two numbers and make sure it's backed up by the same behavior in-game. Don't be afraid to go into PvP, hit your friend a little bit, and test it out. So I hope you find this look at Path of Building and some of the ways the numbers can be deceptive, and therefore some best practices to avoid the numbers being deceptive, like checking in-game or actually testing it in PvP, to be helpful. Now, I'd like you to tell me something. What builds have you played in the past where the DPS in POB didn't seem very good, but the build actually felt amazing? Down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. A special thanks to my YouTube channel members and patrons, whose generous support keeps me from needing to accept sketchy mobile game sponsorships. If you want the best way to keep up with my video releases and live streams, or maybe just hang out and chat with a bunch of like-minded people, be sure to join the Discord. You can find all these links down in the description below. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.